find common ground, if we aren't willing to listen and change our mind as a positive, as actually something to be celebrated, as a growth opportunity rather than a mistake that you got, pushed into, all of these kinds of things. I always see the opportunity in it, but those are my biggest concerns.
Mm-hmm. This is a podcast called Walk, Talk, Listen. An attempt to connect people and make this world a bit better by sharing opinions and experiences based on the belief that everyone's perspective is true, albeit partial. My name is Maurice Blom, and I would like to welcome you to yet another episode of Walk, Talk, Listen. Good day, everybody. This is another episode of the podcast Walk, Talk, Listen. And as always, I'm delighted with today's guest, who will introduce herself. Laurel, please go ahead.
Thank you, Maurice. Hi, everyone. It's great to be here. My name is Laurel Patterson. I lead the SDG Integration portfolio at UNDP. That's a portfolio that's relatively new. It's an interdisciplinary team, sits in the middle of UNDP's global policy network. And we aspire to connect people, ideas, and different approaches, which fundamentally leverage systems approaches to development challenges. I've worked at UNDP for a long time in different places, and this role is a real pleasure to actually connect a lot of those different experiences in countries, in UN reform even, in partnerships in different regions and so on. So that's a little bit about me.
And when you say relatively new, how new is that?
So this team was created in 2019, and it was actually born out of the UN Development System reform process, where UNDP was requested to deepen its integrator function, a function that it was already providing, but really recognizing that the way that challenges were colliding and cascading, it required even more of that integration lens, and it was felt UNDP could provide it. So we put a small team together, really focused on the drivers of what those approaches could be. And just in time for COVID, more or less.
Laura, what I would like to ask you, because I was looking at your bio, and before you started with UNDP, you worked at the university, so you come from the academic world. So my question is, why did you shift, from university to the UN?
Yeah, so I actually went from the UN to the university and then back to the UN. Yeah, when I finished grad school, Canada at the time, I'm Canadian, I was studying in the UK. It had a program that placed you in an entry level sort of a position. I had the opportunity to go to Zimbabwe and work in Southern Africa, mainly on Angola, actually. It was all covered from the office in Zimbabwe. And then I came back to Canada. And at that time, I don't know if it would work the same way today, but I sent an email to the former foreign minister of Canada, who was running a think tank out of University of British Columbia. And I said, I love this work. I want to come for free. And anyway, went back, drove across Canada and spent a couple of years doing that work on the West Coast before I came back into the UN system.
Wow. I don't know if that still would work nowadays. I mean, you would not send an email or something. You would drop some message in somebody's DMs in Instagram. Probably that's what you need to do. Hey, and so why did you decide to study what you studied? I mean, how did that come about?
For me, when I went to, I don't think I knew exactly. In my undergraduate, I started in economics and didn't find that was the best fit for me. I moved over to political science, and then I did my graduate studies in international relations. I did sort of a double major in international security and international law. And what I was focused on in my thesis, and it remains a question for me in the work today, is what are the factors and conditions? What are the personal as well as the structural incentives to bring people to a negotiating table. And of course, Angola at the time had been mired in a civil war for many, many years. And there'd been so many previous attempts driven by all kinds of different constellation of actors. At that time, targeted economic sanctions were being introduced from the Security Council for one of the first times. And I was curious, does that get you closer? Does it bring us closer? What compels people? If I have my position and perspective, we were talking about polarization a couple minutes ago. What compels anybody to shift their position, particularly when so much is at stake? So that's always been a question for me. And that's what took me into those first, out of my studies and into the UN system.
Hey, Laurel, I mean, the reason that I started this podcast is that, more than 10 years ago or so, I started to do a 100-mile walk to raise awareness about hunger, poverty, and injustice. And so I walk 100 miles in a week, so 15 to 20 miles per day. And then I'm very often accompanied by somebody, we would talk. But 2 years ago, because of COVID, it was not possible. So I was walking alone. So I thought, okay, this is not how I envisioned it. So that's why I started this podcast to virtually walk with people. And then it got out of hand, and 2 years later, I'm still doing it. But it's a lot of fun. But if, my question to you is, if you would be asked to walk 100 miles in a week, why would you walk, for which cause?
If I was going to walk, that's a great but a tricky question. But to me, what it would land on is on this notion of the 2030 agenda of leaving no one behind, and genuinely meaning it. And so to me, it is easy to say, but when you really think about what it would take, fundamentally, it's a question of justice, I think. And it's a question of voice, and it's a question of agency and an ability to define and determine your own future. So to me, those are always that would be what would lead me onto the road. That leads me down a lot of roads as it is, but that'd be another reason to walk.
What gets you out of bed, except for an alarm clock, maybe in a you told me you have kids, yeah.
Yeah, especially with the time change, those definitely get me out of bed now. No, to me, it's I think that I've had tremendous opportunities in my professional life, and I've had an opportunity, but I've also taken it and sort of walked into a space of being able to very meaningfully connect my personal self and my professional self. And I think it's a false separation in any case. We're always ourselves. But I've tried, what gets me out of bed is a challenge to myself to really try to more fully bring myself into my work, not to make it about me, but to provide the biggest contribution that I can, even if it may not be the most fashionable, even if it may not be the most, but if I don't do that, one of the books that I was reading over COVID was this book called 4,000 Weeks, A Mortal's Guide to Time Management. But with 4,000 weeks, I don't want to look back and say, God, I wish I had have just said what I felt or been courageous in my choices that I believe, but because of my life experiences, what I have witnessed, etc. So that opportunity and that challenge to myself is probably the thing that keeps me motivated.
I definitely resonate with that. I'm a fan of a philosopher called Ken Wilber, and he says every issue has at least 4 perspectives: I, we, it, it's. So if you can't work on systems change without working on yourself and knowing who you are, and then the community as well. Talking about community. During those walks where I'm accompanied by other folks, we very often talk about religion and spirituality, and it has to do something with walking. I think, I've asked myself often the question, why, for God's sake, why am I doing this? My knees are hurting and stuff. So you think, you think about life and spirituality, religion, and it's very often you make a link with the younger generation that, some of my guests are saying, they are different. Well, I've used younger folks as guests as well, and they say, no, we are not different, we are the same, etc., etc. So my question to you is, what do you see happening among youth in your community around religion and spirituality? Is that different? That your generation,
Yeah, I mean, I would say from where I sit, from what I see, I do see a questioning of power hierarchies, and systems and institutionalized systems that wield control over people, and a rejection of that. Number one. Number two, I also see a lot of young people finding beauty and inspiration and spiritual wisdom in nature. And I take a lot of hope in that, because this is where we have miracles unfolding within us and around us all the time. And so that I see as an opportunity, but also for a younger generation, I see it as a challenge to navigate all of the different devices that steal your attention and which rob you of your intention, because your attention is lost. And so that's the two things. So that's the hope of where I see is that recognition of miracles all around us and within us, and needing for younger people to very carefully manage, and for all of us, frankly, but for those of us that didn't grow up with it in the same way, I think you have a different starting point to measure against versus others for whom this has always been an important medium. Because my fear there is that you can't see all of the beauty and the inspiration and just this tremendous wisdom that surrounds all of us. You've blocked it. And I believe that the universe is not going to find that for you. It's going to move around. We, like water, moves around these kinds of. So if you're not going to activate yourself, your own curiosity, if you're not going to tap into this potential, you miss it. That's what I believe. And so that's both the opportunity, but partly, I think, the concern for a younger generation.
So it's interesting what you were saying in terms of lifting that up in, getting closer to nature, being more aware of that, being aware that we are interconnected as well. And that's something that I think happened to many of us, if not all, who were experiencing COVID, being at home, and more people were walking. And what I've said in some of the previous episodes, that happened maybe for 2 weeks. And then after that, it became clear that the vaccine was available. And then we went, we were thinking only about ourselves again. Anyway, so that's my worry. My question to you is, what do you worry about at the moment?
Yeah, I would share a similar concern of the extremely fast return to status quo after such a profound and tremendous disruption. I think we have to ask ourselves questions about that, because if we don't learn from that, it will prevent us from being able to navigate the challenges that are present today and ahead of us. So that I worry about. But I guess within that worry is I really worry about, and similar to this point I made earlier on being our lives being sort of adjudicated by these different digital mediums, I just worry about disconnection more than anything. And I worry about, and this is where me and you connected in the first place, I worry about a lost art of dialogue, and being okay with disagreeing. No problem. In fact, encouraging spaces where that can be explored and debated. And it's so human. It's so much about who we are. And when we surround ourselves with devices that sort of filter out what we may not agree with or amplify things that will cause a sort of like a knee-jerk reaction, we've prevented ourselves from actually capitalizing on the opportunity that we have in 2022 to do better, to evolve, to learn more, to reach towards one another rather than separate from. Even me and you, we're talking now, we're having this conversation. We're doing this via Zoom. I mean, so many people have gotten used to these kinds of frameworks. And I think that some of it, because we haven't been able to be in person, it's too easy to switch off figuratively and literally when you don't like something, when it doesn't suit you. And I think that those are my, and of course, because of the rise of misinformation and all these different ways that our perspectives on the world are manipulated, that this is my biggest fear. Not that we can't find the solutions, not that any of these challenges are impossible for us to navigate, they're not. But if we can't find each other, if we can't find common ground, if we aren't willing to listen and change our mind as a positive, as actually something to be celebrated, as a growth opportunity rather than a mistake that you got, pushed into, all of these kinds of things. I always see the opportunity in it, but those are my biggest concerns.
Mm-hmm. Do you still see hope? And if so, where?
Yeah, I always see hope because we're here. And it's today, which it also always is. So we're always here and it's always today, right? It's always now. So the opportunity is always there for us across different perspectives and different contexts and so on. And I don't think you can, I think the key for that is that you can't kind of minimize the context and how much the context and the collective shapes our experiences, what we see as possible, what we could be hopeful about. So for me, I see hopefulness in different places, but more than that, for me, more than saying what's maybe one place or another that I find things to be hopeful for, is more, I try to challenge myself to be open to a diversity of ways that's expressed. Right? There's so many different ways, and also be cognizant of what prevents people, those structural barriers in people's way for them to really exercise what would be their highest potential. And then how do we look very intentionally at those barriers, which again, it requires a collective lift. But I find hope in a lot of places. And I think we need to be as open as we can be to the way that manifests in a language that we don't agree with, in a sector that we don't think is valid, whatever it happens to be. But I also just think there needs to be an opening up of those spaces and activating that potential even where we didn't expect it.
Let me continue asking a question in terms of opening up. Let's open up Laurel a little bit more. Music is very important to me, so I always ask a question about that. So if I ask you to come up with a piece of music or a song that best embodies who Laurel is, which piece of music or song would it be and why?
That's a fun question. So I went to a school for the arts all through high school, and I studied music. And one of the things that I really didn't fully appreciate until I started working more in the space of systems transformation, how much music activates a systems way of thinking. Because when you're playing in a symphony or in any kind of orchestra, any kind of collaboration, you're doing multiple things at once, and I just think it gives you a perspective on where you sit, where others sit, what a collective sounds and feels like, where adjustments need to be made, all at the same time. So I never have a perfect way, and I've been searching in some of the literature to make a direct connection between musical collaborations and systems thinking. and I know that's not the question that you asked, but I think it's a really powerful way of describing what it feels like to not only think, but to act in systems. That's that. If I were to pick an artist and a song, I would pick Nina Simone, and I would pick her song, which is based on a poem that's not by her, but I can't remember the name of the poet, but it's I Wish I Knew How It Would Feel to Be Free. And that is a powerful song. For me, I've gone back to it many times over my life, but for my youngest, who just turned 3, that's the song, which I'm not going to do now, by the way, Maurice, but that's the song I sing to him most evenings.
You must have heard a previous episode that I did with I think it was with Maya Azucena, and I got her to sing in an episode. So I'm failing here. So Laurel, I made a Spotify playlist. So all the songs that are chosen by my guests, you can listen to that. And it's for me it's really a go-to, because it reminds me of the people I've spoken with, and it's from hard rock to classical music. So it's really it's an eclectic list, but it's really cool. So Nina Simone. That particular song we did not have yet, so thanks for sharing that. Let us go to you're responsible for the SDGs in your organization, to keep an eye on that. And so a question that I always ask about to my guests is what do you want my listeners to know about the Sustainable Development Goals? So
thanks. Yeah, it's a great question. So for me, what I would encourage all of your listeners, is to go back to the 2030 preamble. And the reason for that is because I think there is such a powerful collective statement about the world as we see it and the world as we wish it to be. And my perspective is that the 17 goals are incredibly important. So are the targets and indicators that help us understand them. But the most important thing for all, to me, is that collective ambition. The 2030 agenda is the world's first globally agreed systems agenda. We've never had this before, and it's made for a world like this. It's made for challenges like this. And I would encourage us, it's universal and it's interdependent. I would encourage us to not be reductive at any point. And that's where I feel sometimes when you start looking at numbers of goals and targets and so on, it's not as easy to hold this vision and ambition, which you have in the preamble. And I think sometimes we forget that we've got this beautiful negotiated, right? I mean, it's an incredibly powerful negotiated preamble agreed by all member states.
So I'm going to push you a bit on that. So because my listener would say, I don't have time to read that in preamble. Why didn't she explain it to me? What the essence is. So
here's what I think is important in that preamble is that it not only reflects back where are we coming from, what are the important precedents and what are the important agreements that are in place around things like poverty eradication, ending hunger, et cetera, et cetera. We knew a lot of those from the MDGs, but the SDGs open up a space for us to say, there's much more that shapes our human experience. And it's not only about human progress, it's about our stewardship of the planet, right? And to me, all of that gets captured. Your audience might also argue, yeah, but those are in the goals. And that's true. What to me is in the preamble is a powerful statement on human dignity, which needs to drive everything that we do. And I think that's so important not to get lost and not to simplify. And the second is it makes a commitment to future generations. It in fact says at the end of the preamble, we may be the last generation that can shape the future in a way that can protect it for our future generations. And that choice is in our hands. So I also think these are very powerful reminders. Development is about choices, fundamentally. And this to me is a really important one that places dignity and future, not only past perspectives or whatever, but future generations at the center of what we do today.
Yeah, Laurel, and I know you're working on this as well. There is a group of people right around the world that's growing, that's saying, one of the reasons that we are not doing well, towards these SDGs, towards this world that, we would like to see. And basically, if we don't do it, our world is going down the drain. Has to do with, we did not put a focus on the abilities and skills and capacity that you need as individual and as community to really work on, these system changes. The inner development goals, they came up with five inner development goals. So, yeah, I know that you have heard about the inner development goals. You have done sessions on it. Same question. What do you want my listeners to know about these inner development goals?
I think what's important, making the connection to what you say about the SDGs and if they're off track and what it would take to put them on track. I think the collective challenge to us, and that's again why I go back to the preamble, I don't think that the vision or the ambition needs an adjustment. I think it's extremely powerful, and I think it reflects the world as we're seeing it today. But I think how we get there is what has to change. It's the how that has to be fundamentally reimagined out of incremental, step-by-step. It won't get us there fast enough in that case, but also out of an idea or a mindset that would suggest that the technical actions themselves will solve things. What that does is it separates us from us fundamentally. And so if we want to transform systems, which is what we are saying that we want to achieve through the 2030 agenda, we have to be willing to see ourselves as actors in those systems. We have to see ourselves as part of those systems that propel change, and those systems which, in fact, have left significant sections of the global population behind, actively so. Those are realities we have to confront. They relate to our societies, they relate to our social contracts, they relate to our own beliefs and values. So for me, it's not so much to say, how do we get goal 10 back on track? It's to say, what more of ourselves is required? And this is where some of the work that we have done also with the Presencing Institute, I have found particularly powerful to connect not only our intellect, but to connect a kind of, our intellect with our hearts, with the wisdom of our heart, from our experiences, from our compassion and our empathy towards each other. And when you don't do that, it's obvious what happens, right? We watched what happened in COVID with the introduction of vaccines. Some countries got them and some countries didn't. And there was no global solidarity. We didn't see it. We saw just the opposite. We saw every country. And those things I think they're very strong indicators to other parts of the world. It's all fine to say solidarity on a sunny day. It's different when the stakes are higher and the stakes are collective. So to me, unless you're activating your knowledge, your intention, and your actions from a place of your heart, not only from your intellect, you're not going to make the choices that you need to make. And we saw exactly how that happened. So I think the inner development goals are a useful way of trying to sort of connect that with the SDGs themselves and suggest that some of these inner shifts are really critical to the outer shifts that we want to see. But I think it gets picked up in a lot of different ways. There's tremendous work in the climate field, in the inner Green Deal out of the EU and other partners that is really looking for ways to intentionally connect mindsets with collectives and with action on very specific challenge areas. And for me, that's the only way forward. There's no other place, there's no other person, there's you and there's now. And that's where we have to start from. And that's not something you're going to read in one of the goals. But if we can't bring that together and create that trust and those collectives no, then I don't think we're going to get anywhere near. In fact, we're seeing the backsliding, right? For the last 2 years, UNDP's Human Development Index has indicated a backsliding. Since the Human Development Index was created, this is the first time we've ever seen this. So we know what we're not doing. And I don't think it's more bright ideas necessarily. I think it's a reconsideration of how and what we bring to the table, and the courage to make choices that, may not be an immediate benefit for you, but they would in the longer run offer a greater benefit for a collective.
I would like to piggyback a bit on what you said in terms of, maybe not everybody is able to participate really. And, there's a lot of inequity. So I would like to hear from you what your thoughts are in terms of, and I know this is a difficult question that I'm going to ask, but I'm going to ask it anyway. And that is about the NGO sector as a whole, and how did they do, according to you, in terms of racial justice? And, and I'm asking this also because my organization celebrated, I think, last year its 75th anniversary. So we did a lot of reflection. One of the things that we looked at is how did we do, around racial justice issues. And we were established in 46. How did we do during the 60s, et cetera, et cetera. So, but yeah, my question is, from where you are sitting, what do you see? And how did we do as NGO sector? And what should we do better?
Yeah, it's a tricky question because I just don't think I have an answer to that. What I could say related to what you're asking is that I think that NGOs have played a critical and continue to play a critical role in advocating and bringing different voices and perspectives to the table, in many different fora and many different forms. So I think that's hugely important. From where I sit, I think the rise of different social movements that we've seen recently, Black Lives Matter, among many others, these are critical drivers of the changes that we need to see. And many of those connect and amplify and are enabled by different civil society actors. And for me, this not only is the issue itself, but it's reimagining the way that we build collectives, the way that we govern collectives, where we put value, what matters to us. So I think it has the potential really to be transformative, and it connects people. It's a story and a belief and a vision that people find more compelling than the one that we have now. And I read an interesting quote from a marketing, I don't know where it was from some kind of a marketing guru, but their perspective was, most people are motivated by fear of what they might lose. They're not motivated by an ambition of what they might achieve. So in anything that you're putting forward that you want to be compelling and connect with people, it's not only the vision that moves you, it's addressing those fears that would prevent them from seeing it in the first place. So, and I do think that a lot of the work that many civil society actors are picking up are helping not only to create and galvanize towards that vision, but to recognize what prevents in the first place from people being able to capitalize or really to realize that.
I'm going to connect you with the previous guest, who Ajit Sai, Santaputra from Bangkok, Thailand.
My question for the next guest would be, do you think you'd be happier if you could never be in pain?
And that's a big question. I mean, I guess the point of sharing on your podcast is obviously that I can only answer that from my own perspective and my own experiences. And from my side, the distinction that I would make is between pain and discomfort. And I think it is really important that we have more tolerance for discomfort. It's how we grow. It's how we learn. You don't know something, makes you feel anxious, the stakes might be high, etc. And you move through it. You have the courage to move through discomfort. Pain is difficult, right? And I think it requires a whole different type of reflection, understanding, and navigation, particularly where there's trauma involved. Those are very real barriers to progress. But from my side, if I look at the experiences that I've gone through, which are painful, deeply painful, right, and cause trauma for me in different ways, I wouldn't wish any of them away. I really wouldn't. I would have maybe wished that I could have recognized them a little sooner and addressed some things in a healthier way than I did. But no, because the journey itself is so powerful. And I think when you work through discomfort, you know yourself and you build confidence in your potential. And this is what I think is really key. A close collaborator of mine is Otto Schormer, and he calls it action confidence. And I really believe in that. And you need to struggle. There's nothing really that comes of value without an effort, without a struggle, without some discomfort. But the more you do that, you activate your own ability to see and realize your highest potential. And without being able to do that, I don't see how we move. I don't see how we move at the speed or the scale that we need in the coming decade. So no, I guess that's a long way of saying I don't wish that I had never been in pain. But I would say that addressing pain is not something, and we're seeing the mental health issues that so many people face today. I just don't think we can underestimate that collective trauma. And it has to be given the time and attention that it deserves.
Let us continue with connecting. So I connect you with the next guest. Do you have a question for my next guest?
The question for your next guest for me, let's see. I think I would want the question to be sort of a specific one. So as you come to the end of the podcast, my question would be, what are the one or two things that have come up just as a result of this podcast, the virtual walk, as you've put it, that you would immediately action within your span of possibility and potential that exists with you today? And that's the same thing I would put back to your listeners right now. And I put it back to myself as well, too, with this opportunity, not with what you might know 3 years from now, not with what you might hope for if you studied a bit more, but just from the opportunity of listening and walking together. What would you commit to yourself? Because I think we also need to create those real, practical, beautiful, humble commitments, first and foremost to ourselves. So that's for your listeners, but that's also for your next guest.
Great. Thank you so much. I think that's it. Would like to, really thank you for taking the time and sharing your wisdom with me and the listeners. I really appreciate that, and I enjoyed it, and I'm sure the listeners did as well. So thanks a lot, and good luck with everything that you do, and thanks for who you are as well. So
thank you, Maurice. Thanks for having me. Thanks for the opportunity, and thanks for those that were listening in.
Thank you for listening to Walk, Talk, Listen. Please check us out on 100mile.org or follow us on Facebook or Instagram.